We're edging closer to this year's SRC elections, and we thought, well, how better than to get to know your candidates through a debate? Hello, I'm your host, Tsukufatsa Makola, and this is one of many election debates that we're set to embark on as we gear up for this year's election, or SRC election, at the University of Pretoria. This is run alongside the Elections Management and Consulting Agency, as well as the Department of Student Affairs here at the University of Pretoria. Allow me to introduce our candidates. Furthest from myself, we have Felicia. Next to Felicia, we have Eclayton. And next to Eclayton, we have Dalenta. Thank you so much for joining us for this SRC debate, for this portfolio of SRC Treasurer. I'm going to start with you, Dalenta, or actually, yes, Dalenta, since you will now have the mic. I just want to know from you, as the position of SRC Treasurer often entails, managing the finances of, the SRC body. In a constrained economic environment, how would you ensure, if elected into this position, that the SRC funds are allocated responsibly, transparently, and as well as in accordance with the approved financial controls?
Thank you so much for the question. So in a constrained economic environment, I would ensure that every rand is allocated accordingly to the approving budget, and the university financial controls. And I would also prioritize essential students' need. Like, I will always prioritize what students need and not what they want. So I'll also ensure that spending is properly recorded and reported, because for me, accountability means being able to explain where every fund and every rand went.
I'd like to shift the mic over to your fellow candidate, Eclayton. You've just heard what Dalenta has just said in terms of, some of the accountability measures that ought to be in place and transparency that ought to be afforded to students that place you in this position. I want to know from you, if you had to be elected as SRC Treasurer, how would you ensure that, you will maintain that the SRC funds are allocated accordingly and in a transparent manner?
Hi, thank you again. My name is Eclayton Wanzule. This is a very critical topic that you've mentioned, transparency and accountability. We've been talking about it. Transparency and accountability in particular is one of the core things in what I've been studying in my degree. So it's something that's close to my heart. You need to be someone that's responsible, someone that will be able to account to the people and have accurate records and reports in terms of where the money is going. So for practicality, we need to have certain structures or mechanisms that's going to be in place for students to regularly access where the money is going and whatnot. So through the students, then we'll be held accountable to say that, students are still complaining about this. So we're also going to have like some sort of reporting from the students to say that, you've promised us that you're going to do 1, 2, 3, and you haven't done that as yet. So us or me as treasurer, I'll be able to say that accountability will be firm, because in what I'll be doing and the report that I'm going to be giving back to students actually aligns with what we should be doing in the SRC.
I'd like you to shift the mic to your fellow candidate. Felicia, you've heard what your fellow candidates have had to say in terms of some of the practical solutions that ought to be brought in order for accountability and transparency to be brought forward when it comes to student finances, or rather the SRC's funds. What are some of the solutions that you plan to bring forward if you had to be elected into this position?
Thank you for your question. I share the same sentiments as my opponents. I do believe a solution that I would provide is by prioritizing the needs of what students have voiced out. So also making sure that you look at what initiatives have already been in place to make sure that we're not over-allocating funds to the same things without realizing. So for example, if we have problems such as housing, accommodation, or food insecurity, or let's say we have another problem such as student debt, let's look at the initiatives that are already available. For example, we have historical debt bursaries that are available to deal with that. For example, we have financial plans that UP provides for people to be able to pay off their student debt. Currently, there is also a fundraising campaign that was launched last month that contributes towards graduates who qualify for their degrees but haven't paid off their student debt. So that way we can be like, okay, that's one out of the way. Let's focus on the next one, housing accommodation. Is it to do with NSFAS? Is it to do with other places? Let's communicate with the tenants or people in control of these people's accommodation to help provide solutions. Then, what's left? Food insecurity. Now we can see that our main priority is food insecurity. So prioritize it, most important to least important, look at what's available, don't abuse the resources.
Yeah, you've mentioned something very crucial that has seemed to, caught the attention of Dalinta. I'd like you to pass the mic to her just to get a bit of her response as well.
I agree on what Felicia is saying. So to emphasize on the needs of students, we should also understand that every funding needs to be accounted for. Every rand that we use or every resources that we use, we need to also account to the student. And we need to also remember that public funds require public trust. So when we prioritize these students' needs, let's take for an example, maybe the funding for those who got those who were not able to be funded like throughout the year, maybe they didn't get funding for like a short period, maybe from July up to November. So by prioritizing them, it doesn't mean that we should actually allocate them with the same amount of money, but it means that we should use the same strategy. Like if we are now supporting someone who is financial struggling, it might be challenging. It might be depending on the challenge. You could say, saying that this one is struggling to actually pay for accommodation. This one is struggling to pay for the tuition fee. This one is struggling to pay for something that is related to academics. So by saying that we are prioritizing students' needs, we don't specify like saying we will be allocating every student with the same amount, but we will be using the same strategy for every student that needs help, and we will be prioritizing their needs, making sure that they are met, and also accounting for the funds that we will be using, that we use this amount for this and this and this, and also the amount that we are saying that we used to the student while we are accounting, it should also correspond to what we did for the students.
I'm going to ask you to shift the mic to Clayton because it seems like he has some sort of response to what you've said. Clayton?
Thank you again. My colleagues already said a mouthful, but I think there's a lack of emphasis in between the lines. In terms of the portfolio of treasurer, we need to understand that we are talking about money, right? So we cannot talk about how we're going to do A, B, and C without knowing if the money will be enough. So we first need to establish, or rather secure, funding in a proper way. For example, sponsorships. How will we fundraise? Who will we connect with? What are the criteria they're looking for? So in that sense, and we need to understand that we don't start doing this when we are already in our treasurer portfolio. It starts this year. If we do it next year, some sponsors or funders, they need some time before they can give you that funding. So it's already going to cause a lot of problems if we wait for next year. That's why I'm saying that if I am treasurer, I'll ensure that this year I start looking for sponsors so that when next year comes, I already know that we already have so much that's going to be provided to us, and this money will actually even go towards assisting students with registration, because that's a major factor that we are currently facing right now. So it's not all about, okay, once we receive so much, we're going to do this and this and this. How will you receive the money? Will you receive that money? Will it be enough? So it's one of the factors that we should take into account before we talk about other things, because we need to talk about the things that, the money that will actually help us ensure that we get the job done at the end of the day.
Now, Clayton is raising a very crucial issue, which is funding and how the SRC gains its funds. It's no secret that the SRC often has to look for funding elsewhere, apart from the university itself. I'd like you to shift the mic to Felicia. And Felicia, I want you to answer this simply? You know, we know that obviously the SRC often has to, you know, look for funding elsewhere apart from the university itself. How do you plan to navigate this very difficult issue of funding, and how would you plan to source funding if you had to be elected as SRC Treasurer?
Thank you for your question. I think my answer will also answer his question on, or what he said about not emphasizing on the other parts that he mentioned. And to add on to what he said, I wanted to say that it's important to understand that, yes, there is an emphasis on finding the resources, finding the funding, doing what needs to be done. But you cannot go and look for things that you don't know what you're looking for. You have to know, what are we prioritizing? What is in need? Because that's how you know to look for the right people. Yes, we need money, but are there other ways we can find resources that might not be as easy as obtaining money? Like, there are certain things that people are willing to give, but people are not always as willing with money. So we can't always have the goal to reach, we can't always have the narrative to reach a certain goal through one way. Because as treasurer, what's going to happen if you don't find the money? Does that mean that your job is done? Or are you going to try find alternative ways to achieve those resources, right? So if I was SRC treasurer, what I would do is not only advocate for fundraising activities or campaigns and the traditional ways of finding sponsors and promoters, but I would also advocate for not just events where you say, okay, entrance fee, this will go towards this or this will go towards this, but also giving people the option to say, okay, if you can bring this type of food, if you can bring this type of clothing, this would be appreciated. This would be, you know, advised. Because a lot of the time, if you show people what you're actually raising that money for, they are more willing. Because a lot of the time, people are not willing to give money when they don't know where it's going towards. So we have to implement as many programs or initiatives that are possible while also trying to get sponsors in order to achieve that goal in more than one way. I hope I've answered your question.
I'd like you to shift the mic to Dalinda. It seems as though she also had a response to what Clayton said. Dalinda?
My response to what Clayton was saying is same as Felicia. I'm emphasizing her point that if we are not able to find sponsors, it doesn't mean that our responsibility as a treasurer is done. We should know how to work around the budget that we have. It's not about how much we have that we need to prioritize students' need on what we have, but it is about on how do we work on that budget that we already have, because it doesn't mean when you go out and look for sponsors, you are obviously going to be funded. So if you are not funded, what are you going to do? Because it's not every case where everyone is willing to fund you or everyone is willing to understand that you are a treasurer of UP student and you need to support UP students regarding their needs and everything that requires money. So it is about how are we going to work on the budget that we have. So if we are saying we are prioritizing students' needs, it doesn't essentially mean that we must have an estimated budget or roughly drafted budget that we will say this one is going to be used on students' needs. Because if now we are waiting for how much do we have, it simply means that if we have, for example, 10K and the students that need financial help is more than the amount that we are having. It means now are we going to help the students that are going to fit for the 10K and leave the rest, or are we going to find a way on how are we going to help all these students using that 10K that we have? Thank you.
Yeah, I'd like you to shift the mic to Clayton to respond to that, and then afterwards I'm going to pose another question to you, Clayton, but before that, you can answer the question.
I just wanted to clarify in terms of the fundraising idea that I just threw on the floor. So in terms of fundraising, right, of course, we will have a set budget before we start everything. But what I'm trying to emphasize is we have historical debt, which is a lot. Many students cannot register, right? So, and I think this year the SRC, they received 350 rands, right? And if you allocate that money towards each and every portfolio, you know, not all the portfolios are going to, draw this money towards the registration, cost and stuff like that. So then I was saying that we need to, while we already have a set budget already, we already need to start working towards finding new reserves of funding that we can get. So, and of course, we need to explain this to our funders, to tell them that we already in the SRC, we know that students are hungry, students don't have food, there's a shortage of beds, tax races. So that money can go towards buying beds, that money can go towards buying clothes, that money can go towards, helping students maybe for 10 months, you give them something, a voucher where they can buy food and stuff like that. So if we're already limiting ourselves, it says that, we're not thinking out the box. So I'm just saying we can do this, we can kill two birds with one stone, do something this side while we're already working on the budget that we already have.
I'd actually like you to shift the mic back to Talenta. Both Talenta and Felicia have mentioned crucial, points about if the Treasurer does not gain enough funding for the SRC. I want to hear from you, Talenta. Would you see a scenario where members of the SRC are willing to take money from their own salaries to fund the SRC fund itself?
Thank you. I'm not sure if all the members of the SRC are going to agree on taking the money and helping students who are in need of financial assistance. But what I'm sure of is that even if we are going to go outside and look for funders and everything, we should still prioritize students' need, regardless of how much are we going to get from our funders. Even if our funders fund us, but then others are not willing to, it doesn't mean that our job as treasurers is going to stop, or what we are here for is going to stop. We should know how to work on the budget that we already have, not essentially saying that everyone should contribute from their money to help students, but how are we going to work on the budget? Even if we go outside to look for funders or sponsors and then they fund us, if now the money is not enough to assist the students that are in need of financial assistance, how are we going to assist those students? Because we cannot sit and say, no, the money is not enough and we cannot be able to assist all of you. We will only be able to assist 10 students or 20 students. How are we going to use that budget to actually assist the students that are in need using the budget that we already have? Thank you.
I'd like you to shift the mic to Clayton. Clayton, same question posed to you. A scenario where the SRC cannot get funding, cannot get donors from outside, and the only resort is that the SRC members themselves take out funds from their own pockets that they're going to gain from, who knows, the university. Would you see a scenario, or would you, as SRC Treasurer, push for a scenario where the SRC members themselves decide to help in terms of the SRC fund?
I'm already, part of 2 NPOs actually. Just to name them, I don't know if it's okay, but it's Aid by Youth. They are very, productive in terms of, having events for students where we already need to take out money from our own pockets, Campus Cares, also starting to establish themselves. So where we need to take out money from our own pockets. So if that scenario were to occur when I am in the Treasury office, it's something that I'm already used to, So, but to be more practical, I would suggest that if we can maybe buy something, that's going to be sustainable. For example, a machine, that bakes bread or something like that, so that we know that it doesn't only benefit few students for that short period. It actually benefits a lot of students over a continuous time. So I'm willing, to do that, contribute towards the students. I have been doing this already, so I don't think it would be a problem for me.
I'd like you to pass the mic to Felicia. Felicia, I saw you shaking your head a bit earlier. in terms of, funding and whether the SRC themselves are willing to put their heads on the block and say, it's fine, we'll take a few thousands or so from our own pockets to fund the SRC fund in order for the money to go to wherever it needs to go. I just want to hear your response on that.
Thank you. To be honest, I don't think a lot of people would be willing. I think it sounds good on paper, and in theory, people will agree now and say it's okay, but when it actually happens, I don't think that'll be the case. But I think if we were ever to be put in that situation, I would suggest that, okay, guys, it's one of two options. Either you're willing to compromise your pockets or find us a sponsor. It's that simple. If you feel too lazy to go out and look for one, it's fine. Take the easy route, compromise your money. I think that's the best way or best solution to not make people forced to compromise what they have, and to also give people the option to be there for students and to help them. But realistically speaking, there are some people like him who are used to doing that and have no problem with that, but that's just him alone. A part of a whole committee, it might not be the same sentiments that are shared. So I believe that the best solution in that context would be to provide two options. Either go try find a sponsor or provide us with the solution, or compromise your pockets. I think that's the best way to put it.
It seems like Talenta has something to add to that. Can you please swiftly pass the mic to her?
Thank you. So on what Clayton said, himself is already willing and he's already used to doing it. And I might also be willing, Felicia might also be willing, but let's not forget that the SRC does not consist of a treasurer alone. It consists of more candidates. So are they also willing, like us? If I am willing to contribute towards students, are the rest, the other portfolios such as study finance and everyone else, are they also willing to contribute? Because now we are speaking on our personal perspective. I might be willing, he might be willing, she might be willing, but what about the rest? And are we going to be able to force them that, no, you have to contribute because you are a member of SRC, or we have to come up with another solution on our own as treasurer? Thank you.
I'd like you to pass the mic to Clayton. Clayton, earlier on, a conversation about the allocation of funding was something that was brought up. Different organizations or different student societies might come to you with different concerns or different needs, and you might be sitting in a scenario where you only have a certain amount of money within the budget, and you have to choose between multiple student societies that are seeking this funding. How will you ensure that this process is done in a way that is fair and in a way that benefits the most students?
I would like to use the principle of beneficence in this scenario, where majority will benefit. So if a said society comes looking for funding, first we're going to need to use some sort of criteria. What do you want to use this money for? Who will benefit? How many people will benefit? So that will ensure that there's fairness with who actually gets help. But if we find that now we're in a situation where there's 2 or 3 societies that, when you're looking at a criteria, all of them fit that criteria because most students will be benefiting from that. We then need to allocate partial funding for each and every society to ensure that there is fairness and to ensure that there is actually, a correct system to actually ensure that all these societies are able to do what, societies plan to do, which is always being there for the students and helping them out wherever they can.
Felicia, you've heard some of the solutions that have been raised by your fellow candidate in terms of ensuring that funding or the allocation of funding is done so in a fair manner. If you had to be elected into this position of SRC Treasurer, how would you ensure that funding is allocated in a fair manner?
Thank you. I agree with what Clayton said, applying that principle where it accommodates or caters to majority of the people. I think that the best way I would implement that is by maybe creating a survey or holding a meeting, seeing what shared interests that people want to achieve in most of the societies, and then cater to them first. We're not saying we are leaving out the other societies that don't share the interest or the minorities, but it would be better to accommodate the majority first, and then later on try to meet the minority as close as possible to their needs as well, because at the end of the day, we must meet all students' needs. It can't just be the majority, or it can't just be the minority. So the best way is to just say that we will try and help you all, but it might be in different timelines. It's likely to be in different timelines. So I think the most important thing is to not be focused on promising heaven and earth to everyone, but to be able to promise sustainability, to be able to promise consistency, to be able to promise to do the most that they can, and to meet the most important priorities that each have mentioned. So, for example, if majority wishes for 5 things, maybe we only cater to 3 things, and then we go and do the 2 things of the minority. Just try to keep it as fair as possible, accommodate everyone as much as possible. So I strongly add on to what he mentioned.
I'd like you to pass the mic to Talenta. Talenta, you've heard some of the solutions that have been raised by fellow candidates in order for some sort of mechanism to be created for fairness in terms of the allocation of funding. What is your response to that?
I also agree with what he said and what she said, that I also support her on the idea of surveying and listening to students' queries, and then that we must not go on what the majority is saying and leaving the minority, but we should also include the rest. So if we cannot do it, and it doesn't mean that we have to promise them something that we will not afford. We should be practical with them, because at the end of the day, we are the one who are going to account for every rand that we use. So we shouldn't be promising them things that we know that it's out of the budget, or something that we know that is possible to maintain. So it's simple. We should focus on what the majority says, and also look at what the minority says, to make sure that at the end of the day, every student's needs is met and every student is satisfied. Thank you.
Talenta, I'm going to allow you to keep the mic as I ask one of our final questions. What kind of mechanisms do you plan to introduce as SRC President, or rather SRC Treasurer, to ensure that the SRC income and expenditure and all that you use your finances for are adequately communicated towards students? Because sure, we can argue that the university ought to be transparent, but the reality is the SRC ought to be transparent with their finances as well. So how would you do this as SRC Treasurer?
Okay, thank you. As SRC Treasurer, I would make sure that I communicate with my other SRC colleagues, such as Secretary and also MMC, to ensure that students are aware that there is a student forum or some sort of reporting where SRC Treasurer will be reporting on how the funds were used and also on how the resources were used, so that every student is aware and every student knows how their resources and all the funds are used and what the budget was. So for me, I will ensure that I communicate with the secretary, since I had them explaining the idea of ensuring communication in real-time world, since now digitalization is taking over. So I think the secretary and also the MMC will be the one who have to ensure that students are aware that on this day there is student forum and everything, so that we ensure that on the student forum it's not only leaders who are there, also students needs to know how the money was used or how much was allocated, and how their resources within the SRC was used. So I will ensure that within our SRC offices, we ensure that every communication reaches students as efficient as it is, so that students are aware, even if they are not attending the student forum on the socials. Communicating with the MMC will help us to publish the SRC budget and everything on the allocation and reporting and everything to ensure that the money was held with accountability and transparency, so that every student can be able to access that information, that how was the budget used, how much was everything allocated for, how much it was used to for these certain needs, how much is left, so that every student is able to access every information on their socials, also on students forum and everything and every platform that is available for every student. Thank you.
I'd like to shift the mic to Eclayton. Eclayton, you've just heard some of the solutions that were raised by Dalenta in terms of ensuring accountability and transparency takes place for students to know exactly where the finances are going within the SRC. What are some of the solutions that you're raising?
Thank you again. Since I'll be working closely with the incoming study finance, Liwatle, we're going to try and ensure that there is proper accountability and transparency. But just to speak more on what I would like to do is to have more like a merit, demerit based criteria, where each and every portfolio, for example, if they receive so much of money, they need to use that money as per agreement. If you don't use the money correctly, obviously you're going to have to take back that money. But if you use the money correctly and stuff like that, you get your merit. If you abuse the money that you've received, obviously there's a demerit process that should occur. Another thing that I would like to touch on is to have like a weekly report box where we place manual reports of what the SRC has been doing, because to be honest, not every student has access to their cell phones and whatnot, so it's better if we have like a well-structured report box, that actually details what each portfolio has done, what the SRC has done with that money. It's going to be better and with that report box, we should place another report box or rather, inquiry box next to the report box to say that students can actually inquire, write down what actually needs to be added, or questions that they might pose, and as well as with the students, we actually need to ensure that whatever we are reporting is actually transparent, clear, easy to read. I would also like if we could maybe report in different languages, where some students can understand better in their languages and stuff like that. It's going to really help towards having smooth operations within the SRC, especially when it comes to like financing and money and all of that. Yeah.
Eclayton, I'd like you to pass the mic to Felicia. Felicia, just close us off on this whole topic of transparency. Students would like to know what happens to the SRC funds, and how would you ensure, if you had to be elected into this portfolio, that would be met for students?
Thank you for your question. I strongly agree with what Dalenta and Eclayton have mentioned. I think they've brought up some very good, strong points and strong solutions. To add on to the accessibility of that information to ensure that it's transparent, I think I would try and encourage for it to be accessible on ClickUp or the UP portal. Those are things that are accessible to students every day. Whether or not you have access to a device, at the end of the day, you have to see your module and your work every day. So the same way we can get communications on everything via email, I do think a weekly report can be sent via email every week, maybe on a certain day, to show accurately where funds have been allocated. And like he's mentioned, clear, easy to read, different languages so that it's fair. And also, I would suggest that not only is it just like clear and easy to read, but it must be detailed. It mustn't just be, okay, 10,000 Rand to food, okay, 5,000 Rand to transport. I think it should be very detailed in the sense of, okay, let's say there was 10,000 Rand allocated to food. How many students was it allocated to? Which reses were they allocated to? Or which accommodations was it allocated to? If it's for transport, how many buses was the case? The liters, like to the point where if someone gets there with their calculator, they can say, okay, I see where it's going. It should never be a thing where there's any certain amount that is unaccounted for, because the moment amounts start to go unaccounted for, that is what defeats the whole point of transparency. So it shouldn't be brief, it should be detailed, it should be precise. And I do believe that there should be a platform that allows students to say when they feel like things are not making sense, to say when they feel like something is fishy, or to say when they feel like, why is this being so much allocated here but not enough allocated here? I think that open communication back and forth will allow us to it will also keep us on our toes. And it will show that you can't really slack, and no matter the circumstance or situation, it'll be detailed and it'll explain why. Because like he said, it would be convenient to allocate a certain amount that people must stick to, but unfortunately things happen and urgent matters happen, or things need to be attended to that we don't plan for. I'm sure we didn't think a lot of problems would come from NSFAS, but here we are today. So I do believe that it's important to just be very detailed on where it went, why, when, to who, for what, everything, so that we can ensure that even if things happen last minute that were not included in a plan of action or in a previous plan, you at least know, oh, okay, it makes sense why this happened. So that's all I can add to their points.
Yeah, I think you've closed this off quite nicely. While you still have the mic, I'm going to give each of you an opportunity to kind of have an elevator pitch. You have less than 30 seconds to kind of tell the voter or the students why exactly they should vote for you within this portfolio. So since you have the mic, Felicia, we're going to start with you.
Okay. If you vote for me to be your SRC Treasurer, I believe that I can encourage and motivate everything to be as proper, transparent, and accountable as possible. I promise to be responsible, I promise to be approachable, and I promise to communicate the best way I can. I do believe that every student deserves an SRC that can answer all the questions that they may have and to be approachable on every single platform there is possible. So please think ahead, vote for Felicia instead.
Thanks, Felicia. And please, can you let us know, Clayton, why should students vote for you within this portfolio as SRC Treasurer?
Students do know me. They know me for closing down dresses. Just to name a few, I'll name a race at Fountains View Thrive. Earlier on this year, actually, it was me and someone who closed down that race, with the help of SASCO, of course. So I'm someone who's always dedicated, someone that's not afraid to wake up in the early hours of the morning, sleep very late for students, And I think with this portfolio, I'm going to be ensuring that money is actually allocated where it should be going. So I'm someone who has good leadership, I listen very well, and I know that students actually, I come from a place where actually, through experiences that students actually face myself, so there's that understanding that I have towards myself and students. So I feel like I'm the perfect candidate for this portfolio. Thanks.
And then finally, Talenta, why should students vote for you as SRC Treasurer?
Thank you. I think students should vote for me because I understand that the position of treasurer is not about having control over money. It is about having responsibility to protect the account for student resources. And I'm committed to responsible financial management, transparency, ensuring that students' needs remain at the center of every financial decision. Thank you.
And thank you so much, Felicia, Clayton, and Talenta. A reminder that these are your candidates for the position of SRC Treasurer, of which you will have an opportunity to vote for them, and also they have an opportunity to present their manifestos on the 13th of August, which is this Thursday at the Piazza, so be on the lookout for that. And maybe there you can also pose some of your questions of your own in terms of what it is that they have to offer for this position.